Rabbi Levi Yitzchok has a novel pshat in Rashi in this week's Parsha. It seems like Rashi is quoting a Gemara, a Maimon Chazal, but if you look deeper, says Rabbi Levi Yitzchok, Rashi is not necessarily referring exactly to the Maimon Chazal. The Gemara says, in Menochios Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, the Gemara brings down that in this week's Parsha, where it speaks about the Karbonos, the beginning of the Parsha about Korban Oila, a fire offering completely burnt on the Mizbeach. So first it speaks about animals, behemos, boker v'tzoin, and then it says v'im min ha'oif, if from a bird. In both places it says reyach nechoyach l'Hashem. It's a pleasant aroma offering to Hashem. So it learns the Gemara like this. The Gemara says v'nema b'shoyr. It says by the aksagas, the bulgier one, the larger one, the much more has heavy with pounds. It says it's a fire offering to Hashem. And it also says by the bird, the leaner, the lesser pounds. Or says by mincha. Then the Gemara says, Echad, to teach you, Echad Amarba, whether you are giving the animal, the gas, the larger, the bulgier one, or you're giving the oif, the mamit, the lesser, the leaner. At least you direct your heart. You're giving it with your whole heart to Hashem. In both of the Karbonos, Hashem accepts it, whatever you could afford. So the Gemara is really very much in order. He mentions first Bevhama, then Oif, then bird, and then he continues Echad Amarba and Echad Amarba, exactly in the same order as he started. Whether you bring in the Bevhama, which is the larger, the bulgier one, Echad Amamit, whether you bring in the lesser, the leaner, the Oif, both places Ishreich Nechoyach Hashem. Rashi, if you look good, a couple of questions over here. By the psukim of Bevhama, Rashi doesn't mention anything. But where does he mention, when it comes to the psukim of the oif, there Rashi says, he changes the order. He says, Nama ba'oif, it says by bird, so right away he changes. The Gemara starts first Bevhama, then oif. Rashi starts first with oif. Nama ba'oif reich nechoyach, it says by bird reich nechoyach, Nama b'Bevhama reich nechoyach. And then Rashi continues. And here comes the question we have to understand. Echad Amarba, whether you're going to bring the larger one, seems like the bulgier one, like the Gemara wants to say, Echad Amarba, whether you bring the bird, at least your intention is for Hashem. So in the order from Rashi, it doesn't exactly make sense. Rashi starts off with Oif, and then says Bevhama, and Rashi should have said, Echad Hamamet, whether you bring the Oif, which is the lesser, or the marbe, which is you bring the animal, which is more bulgier. But the way it sounds like from the words of the Rashi is, Nema ba'oif, Nema b'Bevhama, and then he says, Echad Amarbe, as if the oif is the greater one, the larger one. But oif is lesser, the way the Gemara says. So why does Rashi change the order? And also, if you look good, Rashi does not say the words. Like in the Gemara says, Bevhama hagas, the animal which is bulgier and larger, or the bird hadak, which is leaner and lesser, thinner, in comparison to the animal. Rashi just says, oif and Bevhama. Says Rabbi Levi Yitzchok over a very beautiful thing. He says, the Gemara is one limud, and Rashi is a different, comes to teach us something different. The Gemara is talking about what's called in Hebrew, in Talmudic language, the kamus of the Bevhama. The quantity, the amount of meat that the person is donating to the Eibishter. By an animal, it's tens of pounds, hundreds of pounds. By a bird, it's much less, a few pounds. So over there, the Gemara emphasizes, I'm talking about by Bevhama is hagas, and the oif is hadak. Both cases, hamarbe, the animal, is more. By Rashi, the Gemara says Rabbi Levi Yitzchok, he's hinting at something else. He's not talking about the quantity of the animal, how large it is, how bulgier it is. He's talking about it as something of the quality of the animal, of how the korban, the ichus, how the korban was brought. And he brings over here a Mishnah in beginning of Kinim. In the Mishnayos of Kinim, first Perek, it says these words. Oila sa'oif, when you bring a bird of an oila, nasis lamayla, it was brought on the upper part of the altar. When you brought an animal, lamata, it was brought in the lower part. It was known in the Mizbeach. It was 10 amas high. There was what's called a chut hasikra. There was a thread, a line that separated between the upper 5 amos and the lower. Certain karbonis were above, certain karbonis were below. We understand the ones that were above had a higher level than the ones that were below. For example, all chatos was only brought on the bottom. But over here we're talking about 2 oilers. So the Rebbe's father brings out, there was a certain aspect in the oif that was greater in the way it was brought in the Beis HaMikdash in comparison to how the Bevhama was brought. The carbon oila of the oif of the bird was brought on the top, as the Mishnah says, Lamaila, showing on its greater level. The Bevhama was brought on the mata on the bottom. And that's the pshat that Rashi says. And according to this, Rashi is very, very in line exactly with his words. He starts off, Nema ba'oif. It says, but it especially doesn't say the word daka, because here we're not talking about the amount of pounds. Just the opposite. We're talking, you can soon see it's talking about the quality of how the korban was brought. Nema ba'oif, it says by oif, by bird, rech nechoyach. It says by behema, rech nechoyach. Echad hamarbe. Whether you're like the oif, like the bird who was brought l'mayla in the higher part of the mizbech, you're considered the marbe because you're on the upper part of the mizbech. You're a greater level of carbon, so to say. ונאמר ואחד הממעיט. Whether you bring your bevhama, which is on the lower part of the mizbech, you bring the blood. Both cases, it's accepted. And that's why you see this novel pshat, how the Rebbe's father says Rashi is exactly going in order. First he mentions oif, then he mentions bevhama, and then he says echad hamarbe. The echad hamarbe is not going like the Gemara says on the bevhama, which is Rashi mentions second. No, Rashi is exactly in order. The echad hamarbe is going on the oif and the bird. The echad hamame is going on the bevhama. The Rebbe's father speaks about this in Ha'oris l'Kut Levi Yitzchok in Beshalach, Daf Samach Tes, and the Rebbe, our Rebbe, once expounded on this Rashi. It's brought down in Teres Levi Yitzchok in Shmois. If you want to look it up, on page Kuf Yud Beis.